Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan guru-murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. My guest this week is the Olympic gold medalist, campaigner, activist, television presenter, very famous knitter, Tom Daley. Hi, Tom. Welcome to the podcast. And we've got you on this week because you've made a documentary which combines all of those things except knitting.
Yes.
And it was a remarkable piece of work investigating LGBTQ plus rights, particularly in sport, and followed your campaign for the Commonwealth Games. So tell me, how did it come about? Why did you want to do it?
So it actually started around this time last year, right after the Olympics, and kind of feeling a little bit, feeling extremely privileged to be in the position that I'm in, living in the UK, married with a kid, and feeling very lucky with where my life is. And then seeing sporting events being announced and people looking forward to going to places where the LGBT laws are very extreme. For example, the World Cup in Qatar, the Formula One going to the Middle East as well. Lots of places where queer people are persecuted in quite extreme ways, and in some cases, the death penalty. So for me, it was about figuring out how, as a sporting federation, what they can do to better protect queer people and to support them. And also not just that, but trying to figure out what demands and what things could be put forward to them in order to be able to make those changes. And I went in with the whole thought of that no country with an anti-LGBT stand should be able to have the privilege of hosting such a prestigious sporting event. And with the Commonwealth Games being the next one that was on the horizon and being in the home country, I thought that was kind of the perfect time to then start figuring out what they could possibly do to really take a stand. So it really started as an idea that I was working towards before it became the documentary. My wish right now is to try and get the Commonwealth Games to say that they will not allow any country that has anti-LGBT laws to be able to host the Commonwealth Games. And I know that is a bold wish, but it has to start somewhere to try and create some change.
How long had you felt that? When did you form that view that there needs to be action?
It was actually in the Commonwealth Games in 2018 at the Gold Coast, where I was having a burger and chips after I just won a gold medal on the Gold Coast with my mum, with my husband, and feeling so incredibly lucky to be able to have just dived and not had to think about being persecuted anyway, or being hunted down, or being essentially discriminated against. And I just thought, figuring out how many countries in the Commonwealth still criminalize homosexuality, and it's way over a half. And to think that there's some people that are growing up just fearing for their life every single day made me think, there needs to be something that should be done about that. And with taking a year out of diving, I've basically just thrown myself into this process of going around the Commonwealth, meeting with activists, advocates, other athletes, and asking them what they think is best. Because it's all well and good having a very bubbled view of what we have in the UK of what's best to do, when actually some of the things that the athletes around the Commonwealth wanted were incredibly simple and easy to implement, but became quite difficult to actually get across the line with the Commonwealth Games Federation, with some of the organisers of the opening ceremony, to be able to have the pride flag. And, for honesty, it's a sign of visibility and safety and security and a sign of hope for so many people to be able to see that and to get the eyes on it, not just for athletes, but for the billion people that watch the opening ceremony across the Commonwealth, that they could see that and feel a little less alone.
Yeah, I want to come to sort of how you changed your view. But in terms of the forming of your view originally, had it come about through conversations with other athletes, or was it something you had just looked at knowing what the laws were in other countries?
Yeah, it was more just the fact that, I've had to go and compete in countries where it is really scary to be an LGBT person. For example, going to places like Russia to compete, or I competed in the UAE multiple times. And, it's all well and good going there as an athlete and being protected by the sense of going and staying in a hotel and then going to the pool and then going back again, and not really living there every single day and being truly me and living there with my family, for example. And it just got to a point where I was like, you know what, like, imagine the spectators that want to go. Imagine if I was born in a country where homosexuality was illegal, like what would my existence be? Would I exist? Would I still be alive? Would I have been killed by vigilante groups? There are so many things that could have been if I was born in a different place. And I think having people understand that and figure out what we could actually do to help and to push towards positive change, I think that was the main thing for me.
I mean, in the course of making the programme, and I guess just exploring the issue, you did change your mind about what should happen. Just explain why.
Yeah, initially I went in with the thought of banning all countries with anti-LGBT laws from hosting a competition. That's taken quite a hard stance on that, and it was actually going around the Commonwealth and in Pakistan where the athletes that I spoke to said it wouldn't make a difference. That it wouldn't make Pakistan change their minds. And I actually spoke to a pop star, quite a controversial pop star there called Zulfi, and they said that if we were like, I was to come and say, all right, ban those countries, it then puts a target on the back of those LGBT people. Like, you're the reason why we aren't allowed to host. And it then becomes further oppression. And then I kind of went on this journey of figuring out where the homophobia came from. And then seeing all of these, colonial laws that have remained in place. And like, yes, there might have been homophobia in those countries beforehand with the religious beliefs as well, but it was never actually put into the penal code and actually put into the book of law until the colonial laws came into place. So it was then understanding that, and then the history of the way that has really shaped the way that certain countries in the Commonwealth view homosexuality, and then further ingrained homophobia. So yeah, it really did change my way of, instead of like further banning and saying you can't do this and you can't do that, maybe leading with a sense of love. Like, a negative isn't going to lead to a positive.
Yeah, I mean, just for those who haven't seen the programme yet or don't know, I mean, just explain that sort of the colonial history in the Caribbean, for example, around slavery.
Yeah, so I learned so much on this, and it was actually quite an overwhelming thing to learn a lot about. And the more I learned, the more I realized I didn't know, and then the more ignorant I felt. And so I spoke to a Black historian of queer Black history, and how slavery really ingrained and entrenched the way that rape, essentially, and sodomy became a form of punishment for slave owners to rape in front of family members, in front of other slaves on a plantation. Then that created such a problem for, especially in the Black queer space, of homophobia, because it became something like a white people problem. It was something that white people did to slaves. And again, all of these things, it makes me really uncomfortable to talk about, but it's something that I think needs to be spoken about, needs to be taught. It needs to be something at the forefront of our education system. Like, I did not learn the full history of colonialism at school. I did not learn Black history. I did not learn the full lengths of the slave trade in school. Yet it was kind of skirted over in passing. Oh yeah, this happened, it was awful, and we're moving on. Like, it really needs to be taught in such a way that people really truly understand the systematic racism and the systematic homophobia that is in place because of the history of colonialism.
And did you buy that as an argument and an explanation for why there are homophobic laws and widespread homophobic feelings in many Caribbean islands? Or is there any part of you that's thinking, well, it is a good historical argument, but is it an excuse?
No, I think there's that historical argument, but then again, there's so many layers to it. There's so many, and it's not just one thing that has been the root cause of homophobia. It's the religious belief, it's cultural beliefs, it's then how laws and oppression, and then trying to fight back against oppression. And so it's one of those things that I think in lots of countries it's getting a lot better. Like, for example, in Jamaica, it was in the past voted one of the most homophobic places on earth. And there are people that are doing amazing work on the ground there to really push forward the narrative for change. But there's lots of places that are healing. And I think that's where acknowledgement and being able to speak about it in a way that they feel like they are being understood, I think that's the main message that I got from so many people that I spoke to.
And did you worry about the sort of the 360 degrees of sort of cultural colonialism of you then saying to them what they should be doing or how we should treat them as countries.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why, I felt really that. Well, like I said before, the more I learned, the more I felt I didn't know, and the more ignorant I felt when going into this process. I thought, yeah, we should ban countries with anti-LGBT laws from hosting events. When I was saying that, again, I hadn't spoken to anyone about that. That was very much a view coming from the UK as a white gay man, extremely privileged, and not fully understanding everything that has gone on, what still continues to go on. And I learned so much, which is why my views have changed. And I initially felt extremely uncomfortable to talk about the subject because I don't feel like I'm in the position to be able to do it. But I feel like it's such an important subject to shine a light on and make people aware, because I imagine lots of people who watch the documentary will learn so much about how LGBT people are still treated around the world, because in the UK, we are very much in a bubble, and it's very easy to point the finger around the world saying, oh, this country's not doing good for LGBT people, but actually trying to take the time to really try to understand where that comes from.
And so why did you feel that walking into the opening ceremony with pride flags would achieve something? And what do you think it did achieve?
Yeah, so for me, I think in the UK, it probably didn't have a very big impact because we see the pride flag all the time. We see it everywhere. And I think we often take it for granted. It's, something that we say, okay, well, that's a gay bar, or that's a gay friendly coffee shop, or, you see it on merch and things like that. Whereas in the countries where their existence is illegal, seeing that is a beacon of hope. And I think it wasn't so much about doing something for the UK to be like, oh, wow, pride flags, okay, big whoop-de-doo. No, this was a moment for the 6 flag bearers that were carrying the flag were from countries where at some point in very recent history, their existence was illegal. And to be able to have the power and the space to be able to do that and be able to walk out as a person that used to be illegal or still continues to be illegal in their country was hopefully to give people a sense of hope that if that was shown on TV, if it was being streamed live across the Commonwealth to 1 billion eyes, that some people were able to see that, and it might have been able to give them a sense of hope that they were less alone in the world, that there were other people like them out there, and that we have a space and we deserve to be there and we're not going anywhere.
How did you find the confidence to speak like this and to campaign like this?
I didn't have the confidence, honestly, before this. I would speak out about things that I thought, but I never went into any kind of deep issues, especially when it came to issues outside of the UK. And I think once I spoke to so many people, I almost felt obliged. I almost felt like it was a responsibility, something that I had to do, because for so long, lots of people have been trying to get into the room with different sporting federations. And there's almost this responsibility to use my platform, because I knew as someone from privilege that I could get into the rooms with the people that were going to be able to make those decisions and make those things come into effect. And that's why the manifesto that I put together through the documentary and the campaign are the voices of all those people that I've met. It's all of their ideas put into one document that I was able to send to be the person that brought all of those voices to the table. I feel like somebody has to make that start, and to start those conversations and push it to the forefront of people's minds to be able to start to create change. Because if people aren't aware of things, don't know that things are going on, how are things ever going to change?
I mean, you've always been a great speaker, no matter how you felt inside. I mean, I interviewed you in 2012, and you were great as a teenager. But to speak out on this topic is a difficult and a brave thing to do. And so, I mean, have you been influenced by others? Have others encouraged you, or has this all come from you?
Yeah, I mean, there's been so many people that I've met along the way and been inspired by. For example, when I first came out, I knew nothing about queer history. I knew nothing about, when people talk about Stonewall or the origins of the Pride marches, or the fact that homosexuality was illegal in this country, in very recent past, if you really think about it. So there were a lot of things that I was learning as I was coming out and being put into situations where people were talking about certain historic figures and I would have no idea who they were. So then I started again to feel like the more I started to learn about things, the more I didn't know. And then my husband, who had for years been a very prominent campaigner for LGBT rights and marriage equality in the US, I learned so much from him. I've learned so much from being able to go and be in spaces with other LGBT activists and advocates from around the world, and just spending the time to listen and trying to understand. And yeah, like I do catch a lot of heat sometimes for saying the things that I do and putting my opinions out there. But I just think that it's something that people have to start talking about it, because if people aren't talking about it and people are skirting around the subject, and I think that's where the real power is in allyship with all minorities. And I think when all minorities are able to come together and stick up for each other, be there for each other, it creates this really, like, yeah, of course we're a minority, but then if there's lots of minorities that come together, we can really start to demand change. And I think that's the big thing that I've learned over the years, is to try and be there for everyone else as well, not just the causes for a gay man. It's also being there for lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer identifying, intersex, asexual, whatever it may be, being there for the whole community, and also outside of that as well.
In what way does allyship, or how do you do allyship well? You know, because it's all, you know, it's one thing to say, well, I support other causes and I believe in intersectionality, but do you have to be more active than that, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's about being, it's very easy just to share an Instagram post. It's very easy to just be able to put, a pride flag on during Pride Month, or putting a black square on your Instagram. But like that, and also it's very easy to feel bad for things and feel guilty. Like that's what I went through in the documentary. Like I felt really bad and I felt sick and I felt guilty. And I was like, what on earth? Like all of this stuff that I'm learning. But then it was actually one of the queer historians said to me, actually, well, guilt is the first step, but what now? What are you going to do about it? Where does that go? Like, what are you going to do to be able to action those feelings that you're having? You feel guilty, then you feel angry, but then what are you going to do? Showing up for, for example, Black Pride this weekend, showing up, being able to show up for our trans siblings, being able to show up for pride marches, being able to be there for, people that are struggling. There's so many issues that are going on in the world right now, between wars and between like financial crisis, just the cost of living crisis, for example. There's so many issues. So don't get me wrong, LGBT isn't the only thing that is bad about the world, but that is something that I understand in a way that I have that lived experience. So this is something that I push. But it's, again, just being able to be there for other causes in a way that isn't just lip service.
Well, you mentioned trans, and obviously that's very current because politicians are getting very involved in this argument, and Boris Johnson and Nadine Dorries have been coming out saying, it is absurd for trans athletes to compete against women athletes or male athletes if they were born a different sex, and that this is sort of common sense, and it's kind of gathering a lot of currency and a lot of support. And you're on the other side of that, so just explain why.
Yeah, I think for me, sport should be a place of inclusion. Sport should be a place for everyone to be able to enjoy. From the very moment that you're born and show an interest in sport, imagine being a child that knows that they're different and then being told that they are not allowed to participate, that they are not allowed to get involved in something they may really enjoy doing. And, I think obviously it's an extremely nuanced subject, and there isn't just like a clear-cut way of doing it, but it's about taking the time to really try and work out what is the best way to do it, rather than just banning and then forgetting about the trans community completely. Like, what is the way of doing it? How long does somebody need to be on hormone therapy, for example, for it to then become fair? And rather than let's say that it came out that there was like 36 months that somebody had to be on hormone therapy, for example, being able to, if you just all of a sudden say anyone that hasn't had that is just banned now, maybe there are other ways that think that they can still be included. Maybe you give out, if they come in the medals, maybe you give out 2 medals, and like there's so just being able to take the time to just make it inclusive. Of course, there are certain things that need to be researched and looked at, but for me, sport should be a place for everyone, no matter your gender, no matter your sexual orientation, no matter your religion, no matter your socioeconomic background, or your ability, your disability, that if we start marginalizing groups and pushing them away, what message does that send about sport? That not everyone fits in, not everyone is going to be able to do it. And I think that's where I think it can seem a little bit short-sighted, is how can we still include everyone while we're trying to understand?
So it's not that you think that everyone should compete against everyone. So, I mean, how do you react to the crowds who get angry when they see the swimmer or the cyclist or whatever it might be who was born male and then competing against women and beating them, and that they then say, well, that's unfair?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, of course, there's going to be people that are going to be upset about that. And I understand that. I can completely understand that. But it's, again, like there's certain things, instead of being able to just ban straight up, like there could be a way, for example, if in those certain amount of months that there is an unfair advantage, let's say, there could be 2 medals that are given out. If somebody wins, there could be 2 gold medals. And there could be ways in terms of being able to, I don't know, adjust certain timings, whatever it may be. But it puts queer youth at risk when there are messaging out there where it is people are being banned and people are being told that they can't do things, that it's really dangerous to the people that are growing up. I just think that it's a far more nuanced situation than just straight up banning. I think there can be ways that things can be looked at.
And do you feel the need to find common ground or find alliances with the lesbian and gay campaigners who are on the other side of the argument to you? Or are they just on the other side?
I think our politicians are very, very clever at being able to pit our community, our LGBTQIA plus community, against each other. Because if they keep dividing our community in the way that they have been, our rights will be taken away from us. If we are not there to show up for everyone, that is when things start to get repealed. That is when we can get complacent. And when we get complacent, things get taken away. And before we know it, we will be without the equal rights of our straight counterparts. And that, to me, is a really scary prospect, that if we don't stick together, things can start to be stripped back. You look at the US and the way that that's going with women's rights and with marriage equality being pulled into that conversation. I just think it's extremely important that we are all sticking together in this fight, because, like you say, there are certain groups within our community that are against trans people. But I just don't think trans people are given the opportunity to be able to share their side of the story and be included in the argument, included in some of the solutions, and being able to work together. And I think that's the most important thing.
To come back to the documentary, I mean, one of the most shocking sections for me was hearing you talk about your own experience and your own feelings when you were young and how excluded you felt.
Yes, it's a scary thing to, and I think it's probably different if I was born now and growing up now, but it is a scary thing to know that you're different and to know that you aren't necessarily what people would consider to be normal or consider to be the right thing. And when you always feel that you are the thing that is wrong, and when you always feel like you are the person that is causing everything that is going wrong in the world, it can make you start to think extremely dark thoughts. I mean, I think that's where I was really lucky that I had the outlet of diving to be able to distract myself from everything and be able to escape everything. And knowing that my family I would figure would be somewhat supportive. So it was, coming out was one of the scariest things that I ever had to do. Like, I didn't know what was going to happen on the other side of it. I didn't know what people were going to say or what people were going to think, because you hear homophobic slurs and things that people say just off the cuff, like so commonly, just like you hear, how racism is so prevalent in this country. Like, you hear things and you think, oh yeah, but I'm not racist or I'm not homophobic. But when that is actually put to the test and people feel like they're in safe spaces and they say things, it's actually like, no, I think there is a very backhanded sense of homophobia and and definitely racism in this country.
How did you know that your family was going to be a safe space?
I knew that my friends were definitely going to be a safe space. And I knew my mum was going to not care one bit at all. Like, I knew that she had gay friends, and like she has always been really extremely, positive towards them. And there was that, it was more the older generation within my family, like my grandparents on both sides, that I was worried about, because there is a very much a generational gap when it comes to those things. And so it was really difficult for me when I came out to one set of grandparents who weren't necessarily as understanding. I think it was a shock, and it was a lot. And everybody is going to take a different amount of time when you learn something new about someone. But I think lots of people, I think they may have thought that I was all of a sudden going to change, when actually I was letting them in to know exactly who I was and who I always have been and will continue to be, but they just now know everything. So it was then a really scary thing to have to tell my other grandparents, who I thought might have the same opinion, but turns out they were very much supportive, gave me a hug, and were really happy for me.
And do you wish you'd done it earlier?
I think there's always part of me that wished I was able to, if I was able to take away homophobia and like the way that society is meant to be with everything, I think everybody everywhere would have a different experience of childhood. Everyone, in terms of what toys kids can play with when they grow up, or what they're told they should be. Oh no, that's for boys, that's for girls. In terms of where the places that you can go to feel like you can fit in, the things that you can wear to feel like you can fit in, how you act. There's so many things that is dictated by what society thinks that you should be doing, that it's really hard to grow up and just be you. And I think that's the thing that I would love more than anything for the world to get to, is just let people grow up, let people like figure out who they are without any kind of external factors being able to pull you one way or another.
I mean, I'm aware we could do a whole podcast just on sports and diving, and we haven't talked about that, and we'll maybe save that for another time. But I mean, I just wonder how, your sexuality affected your sport. How did the two things interact with each other?
I knew that there were other gay divers. I think it might be a surprise to people that there aren't many gay divers at all. But it just so happened that some of the most successful ones have been gay. So I knew that there was going to be somewhat level of support and welcoming when I did come out. But just in terms of like the weight that it brings on you in your everyday life, like going through school, having to do my A levels at the same time as preparing for London 2012, knowing that my sexuality was different, being in the public eye, and then having to explore that, and the pressures and the worries and the concerns that come with, what if somebody outs me? What if somebody finds out? I can't talk about it. I can't say anything. I can't trust anyone. So after 2012 was a very, very dark period for me, until I met my now husband, Lance, which is coming up for 10 years now. And that for me was a real pivotal moment in not just my life, but my mental health and my mental state, and where I could really truly think, you know what, I actually can be happy embracing who I am.
I mean, it's extraordinary to think back, isn't it, really, that to say after 2012, when you were a national hero, that was a very dark period for you.
Yeah, it was extremely difficult, and for so many reasons. One, because London 2012 was something that I'd always looked towards, and that was like my end goal. And I did it, I got a medal, and then the world kept spinning and life carried on. I had to go back and finish my A levels. I had to go back and go to training and live my life normally again. And I was just 18, and I didn't have the opportunity to go out like all my friends did, or go away traveling and doing all of the things that people would want to do at that age. So I got to a point where I was really down about the fact that I'd won a medal. Like, where now? What now? Like, I've got 4 years till the Olympics. I'm dealing with my sexuality internally and not knowing who I can trust, who I can tell. I didn't tell anyone, and found myself in this dark space where I couldn't speak to teammates about how sad I was feeling, because none of them won Olympic medals. And it'd be like, well, you won a medal, so what are you fussing about? And then things like, I'd lost my dad, and he was never there to see me win an Olympic medal. There was just constant like pulling into question where I wanted to go, what I wanted to, even if I wanted to carry on diving anymore. And it was only when I met my husband, who had won an Oscar at a very young age, and he had lost his brother at that point, and so understood the pain of loss, the glory of triumph, and then the real dark period that comes after it, and how you can get through that. And he really actually inspired me to get back to diving and feel like, because he was at the top of what he was doing, and I just thought, well, if he's doing that, then I have to be able to be at the top of what I'm doing too. And it kind of created this new lease of life and purpose for me.
And what's the purpose now? I mean, because you're taking this year out. What's that really about?
There were so many reasons. It was actually before the Olympics that we decided to take the year out. And I say we because myself and my coach have taken a year out. And there are so many reasons for it. Spending more time with my family, with Lance and with Robbie, being able to explore other avenues and opportunities, whether it be with TV opportunities. I've always wanted to be able to do this campaign and really try and make a difference because at the end of the day, especially after winning, it may have been different if I hadn't won gold, and I might have been like, you know what, I'll come back after a few months and we'll start again and get going. But I just got to a point where I've achieved everything that I've ever wanted to in the sport. I felt like I couldn't make a big difference if I was just diving. Like, it got to a point, once I'd won that gold, I felt a sense of peace and a perspective of, that Olympic gold medal was everything for me. And that's something that I've always wanted my whole life. But what now? Like, what sense of purpose does my life have if I can't leave this world a better place for my kid than when I came into it? And what can I do with my platform that I have now to try and change that? So I've just taken a big step back to work on that and pushing for some kind of social change. I've been able to go to events and get into one of my other true passions, which is fashion, and recently knitting and that kind of stuff. So I've been able to kind of explore different avenues that I just never had time for when you're training 6 hours a day, 6 days a week.
And as a parent, I mean, you talked about how progressive I suppose you now feel Britain is when it comes to being gay. But do you also feel that as a gay parent, or is that still an area where there are prejudices that we need to tackle?
So living in London, there is definitely a higher sense of acceptance for same-sex parents, but of course there's always some kind of, there's lots of people that I get messages on Twitter and all over the place about how 2 men should not raise a child and how 2 women shouldn't raise a child. And for me, I always look at it as like, what is a family nowadays? What is a family in terms of, what does that look like? Is it a single mum, a single dad, 2 dads, 2 mums, a mum and grandparents, whatever it may be? There's so many different types of families now. And I think the most important thing is a child being loved, being cared for. And I think within the LGBT community, obviously it's not as easy for us to just have children. And it has to be like if we have children, it's something that we've always dreamed of and always wanted to have children. And, for me, that is the biggest, raising Robbie is the biggest achievement of my life. But beyond any kind of medal, beyond anything, like being a parent is just the most incredible feeling ever.
And do you think, I mean, is it the case that you're really mostly able to do that because you are now fortunate enough to be reasonably well off? That if you weren't well off, you would have struggled to go down the surrogacy route and all of that.
Yeah, I think that of course there's so many different factors that make it so difficult for people to be able to, one, if you go down the surrogacy route in the US, afford it. Then there's also in the UK, it's extremely difficult to be able to then go down adoption processes, and like the surrogacy route in the UK is more complicated. There's so many different areas that make it very difficult for same-sex couples to have children. And I am very aware that I come from a sense of privilege that we are able to afford to have a kid, to be able to afford even just simple things like daycare and nursery. And it's again, being a parent, no matter who you are as a parent, I think everybody is just trying their darn best to do the best that they can for their kids. And I think that's something that I think some people can lose sight of sometimes, is that everybody's doing their best. Everybody is in a different situation. And I think, again, it's always very much, everyone likes to point fingers and say someone's doing this and this is wrong and but everyone's doing the best that they can. And I think that's something that we always have to try and get back to.
And what would you say to gay and lesbian couples, because who are thinking about it? Because I think quite a few gay and lesbian couples still have worries about themselves about bringing children into the world. So having done it, what would you say?
That's a tough question, because the one piece of advice that I'd give any other parent is not to listen to any other parent's advice, because you will know your child better than anyone else, no matter what the books say, no matter what other people give you advice. Like, you will know your child better than anyone else. But I think the one thing I would say is that it is an extremely complex and difficult, sometimes heartbreaking process to go through becoming a parent. And I think that's for every parent when they're trying to have kids. There's for some people it's extremely easy, some people it's very difficult. Sometimes it can be straightforward and run very smoothly. Sometimes there's going to be hiccups and there's going to be bumps in the road. And I think just very much being present and in the moment and taking each step as it comes is something that I would say to other parents, especially same-sex parents looking to have kids.
Well, we've touched on a lot, and our time is up, Tom. But if you could change the world in any way, wave a magic wand, what would you do?
I think the one thing that I would love to do to change the world is for everyone to step back and get the sense of perspective of that we are all human beings on this one shared planet, and that we should all come together with a sense of love, with a sense of uplifting everyone, trying to give everyone the best and equal opportunity to be able to be the best that they can be every single day, and to stop fighting, arguing and dividing and pulling people apart, and start to come together as one global entity.
Tom Daley, thank you very much.
Thank you.